Tonight, I thought I would maybe share a little bit about the practices related to the Brahma Viharas. Um, Last time we had class, this was something I was going to talk about, but it just kind of naturally evolved into other topics or moved into other topics. So I thought we'd kind of circle back around to this idea of the Brahma Viharas. Um, so I think it's helpful to kind of understand that with meditation practice, you probably have heard that there's an object to the meditation, that the object of the meditation would be the breath, or what we think of as like home base for our attention. And when the mind wanders, eventually we become aware, we recognize that we're not present, and there's this kind of coming back to the present moment through a recognition and a connection to that object of the meditation. Um, so what I've noticed is with different meditation practices, really it's very much the same practice, but what changes is the object of the meditation changes. So if you are practicing, a single pointedness of mind, cultivating a undistractability, then the mind is really dedicated to this one object, and it might be the sensation of the breath. And the mind wanders, and you come back to that. The mind wanders, you come back to that. When you're practicing mindfulness, it is to be the object of the meditation in a way. It can still be the breath, but in a way, it's also this quality of just being present with the breath or whatever else presents itself. So present with the sound you heard, present with the sensation somewhere else in the body that you're feeling, present with, the perception of a smell, incense, or whatever. It's like wherever the mind goes, it's to have a quality of awareness that's meeting that, being mindful of whatever presents itself. With other practices, maybe different types of ways of collecting the mind to be steady, you might focus on a candle flame, or there might be mantra meditations where you're working with a mantra, using a phrase, and the sound that is being produced by that is the object of your meditation. So mindful listening. Object of the meditation is to listen. And just like with all these other objects that we come and connect to and meet in the present moment, the mind eventually, it might wander away. And so you find yourself thinking about yesterday or tomorrow. And once you become aware that, oh, my mind has wandered away, you come back to the object in mindful listening. You're coming back to just being attentive and listening in a mindful way, where there's a welcoming, open, receptive quality that is non-preferential, just simply recognizing the characteristics of change and emptiness, and seeing the inherent suffering that comes about in our relationship to experience where we are craving or averse, and just waking up to that. So in the Brahma Vihara practices, the object can be different. So, and in that, the object is like, it's this kind of a felt sense. It's the phrases that you're working with. That can be what you're coming back to when you notice that the mind isn't present. You're coming back to wherever you are in this systematic way of working through the practice, using these phrases and directing these phrases to certain targets in mind. But it's not just the phrases alone. It's the felt sense that you're cultivating, that's being generated. So with one of the Brahma Viharas is loving kindness meditation, loving kindness. So there's 4 Brahma Viharas. There's loving kindness, compassion practice, sympathetic joy or empathetic joy, or just simply joy, and equanimity. And with each one of these Brahma Viharas, which we kind of, Brahma Vihara is abode, and Brahma is like awakened, celestial type quality. So the definition I really like is celestial abodes. And the idea that I have is that, if you look up at the night sky, it's expansive, it's celestial. And if that's your home, it's boundless. So this boundless abode is what we're cultivating through these practices, and it's the recognition that these qualities can be cultivated to this boundless state, that we can experience loving kindness for all beings. We can experience compassion for all beings. We can experience joy, boundless joy, and equanimity in that same way. So, what the object of our meditation is also the felt sense of goodwill that we find that we're practicing when we're practicing loving kindness. The interesting thing about loving kindness is, it's not a guarantee that you're always going to feel loving and kind and friendly. Sometimes the loving kindness practice is revealing, the hurt, the resentment. You call certain individuals to mind with the intention to express loving kindness, but what comes up is, the memories associated with that person. Hi. So, so one teacher describes it as that loving kindness is like a magnet, and that as we draw this magnet over ourselves, it pulls out to show us, we wake up to, that which needs our attention, that which we need to take responsibility for. So if you find yourself following a loving kindness practice and you're shocked to find that in your attempt to be loving and kind, you're just, pissed off and angry, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong. That's an indication that possibly the practice is working in a way that you need it to work, to reveal to you that, oh, there's this person and I thought I was over that, but obviously I'm not over that, because here's what's coming up. And so in loving kindness practice, when this sort of thing happens, so let me kind of give you some context for those of you who may not be totally familiar with the loving kindness instructions. There are 4 phrases. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live your life with ease. This is the expression of goodwill that we're offering. And we're offering this to 6 targets. And the 6 targets are ourself, a benefactor, someone who's been of benefit to us, someone who's helped us, a good friend, or a spouse, loved one, that sort of thing, a neutral person. And a neutral person is someone that we don't particularly necessarily have pleasant feelings for or unpleasant feelings. It's very neutral. Oftentimes the neutral person is simply someone that we can call to mind, but that we don't necessarily know very well. Like maybe your postman. You know what they look like. You've seen them walk up your stairs and put the mail in the box, but you don't necessarily have a feeling of them one way or the other. It could be a bank teller or the checkout person at the grocery store that you frequent, a neutral person. The next category is a difficult person. Traditionally, this is referred to as the enemy. And this is the person, obviously, that you've had some difficulty with. And when I'm teaching people the loving kindness practice, I kind of recommend that you don't call to mind your arch enemy. Don't just go right into this working with your arch enemy. Maybe just work with that person who is a little irritating. Maybe that person that never says thank you when you hold the door open for them. They still kind of get under your skin a little bit, and you're able to work with them in a way so that you can really discover the process of this practice, the releasing of resentment and that sort of thing. And then the 6th category is all beings. And sometimes when we come to this category of all beings, it's a very difficult thing to truly connect with. It's like all beings. How do you, it's like we know what 1 million is, but we don't really know what 1 million is. It's like, how much is that? And so what does it mean to come to a more intimate relationship to all beings? You can gradually begin to work into that by maybe saying, may all animals be safe and protected, may they, be happy and free. May all men be happy and free. May all women be happy and free. May all plants be happy and free. And it's just kind of putting things into some context that when you finally come to this kind of expansive expression, you can say, may all beings be free, and have a little more kind of way of connecting to that, if that makes sense. So other ways of recognizing this practice. So these are the phrases, right? These are the phrases, the 4 wishes essentially, and then the 6 targets that we express them to. But that's just the kind of the systematic approach of how we work through the practice. The phrases can be what we return to when we notice that our mind has wandered away. Because we'll be going through this maybe with a particular target, and we might find that the mind kind of gets lost in some sort of memory or some sort of fantasy, and then we suddenly become aware again. We come to, and we're like, oh, well, where was I? And you come back and you begin again with those phrases. It's like, oh, I was working with the benefactor, and let me just begin again. And you start expressing the phrases. But the object of the meditation too is the felt sense. It's connecting to that quality in the heart of goodwill, of friendliness, and feeling that kind of radiate. And there's a way that you can practice, where you're allowing this quality to radiate in all directions, so you feel it emanating, and you can genuinely feel this kind of felt sense of the expression emanating forward, backward, to the sides, above and below. And when you get to that 6th target and you're moving into this sense of all beings, you can begin to maybe just expand that field of loving kindness to be inclusive of the people that we're in the room with. And then expands to include the neighborhood that we're in. And then it expands to include the city that we're in. And then it includes the nation, the country that we're in. And then it takes in the whole world. And then it expands even further into our galaxy. And then beyond our galaxy, where all the other life is. And so, and it's kind of like all beings, the insects, the bacteria, everything that scoots and crawls and walks and trots, and it's really such a wonderful practice for me in my experience of practicing metta, which is the Pali word for loving kindness. Practicing metta for me it is the thing that totally unravels resentment. The resentment, the hurt feelings, the harshness, it really begins to untangle the tangle, as one of my teachers puts it. And then the possibility of moving into forgiveness with people that we have experienced difficulty with really becomes possible. And one thing I say it, and I think I say it just because I like the way this sounds, but it's me kind of moving into a pragmatic understanding of this practice, because here we are wishing, may you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live your life with ease. These are well wishes that we're expressing. And so sometimes, we might think, some of us, we come from the background of cynicism and we're like, what are wishes? It's like thoughts and prayers. What good is that really going to do? And I'm kind of one of those people. And so for me, how I understand this practice working is that in a pragmatic way, it really does benefit the people that you're calling to mind in a very literal way. In that if we have some sort of closed off way of interacting with somebody, or some sort of past hurt that we're still carrying, whether we're aware of it or not, when we come into contact with that person, it's expressed maybe subtly, maybe very clearly, where we are feeling closed and protected, or maybe just domineering and abrasive. When we practice calling these people to mind, we're working with that for ourselves, to free ourselves from those qualities of suffering in ourselves, so that then when we actually meet this person, we're able to meet that person, not meet our idea of that person. Because that's what happens. Oh, that person lied to me. That person is a liar. The mind moves into this, like, I'm certain. I'm practicing certainty. That person lied to me. That means they're a liar. They will always be a liar. That's the box I put them in. And with this practice, we can begin to, put things into context that, and not to define people by their mistakes or their unskillful behavior, but to keep in mind the totality of the person. And finding the freedom, the liberation in that. Now we're a person that when we come into contact with that individual, we can actually meet the individual and not our idea of who we believe they are. Because that's what we do, you know? It's like, okay, this person was sending me texts and this is what they said and it upset me. And now when I meet this person, I'm seeing the texts, I'm seeing my idea of who they are, and I'm not connecting to the actual individual, because people are changing from moment to moment. When you wake up with your partner or your spouse or whoever you wake up with, your dog, whoever you live with, when you wake up and you see that individual, you're seeing a brand new individual, never before seen by man. But yet, the way the mind is, it conceptualizes things, it misses the impermanent nature, the changing nature of all things. And, okay, I know you, I know exactly what you want for breakfast, I've got you figured out, there's no work needed, my job is done. And those are the good cases. The other cases are, you're a liar, you're never not going to be a liar, I can't trust you, and that's who you are. But when we're open, we can kind of move into like, oh, hello, And it's a wonderful thing because it keeps relationships dynamic. You see the organic nature of these relationships. It helps you stay in touch with the reality that a relationship is always work. That relationship is a fixed and permanent concept oftentimes in the mind, and the reality of that is relating. You're in this relating with somebody, and that's something that happens, every time you come into contact with them, So for me, there hasn't been any other practice that I've experienced that frees the mind in that way, to like that. It's like doing crunches. It's like, man, suddenly you got a strong core. It's like, wow, that I noticed that right away. And metta is kind of like that. It's like suddenly you've got a strong heart that is able to meet the challenges that inevitably happen in relationship. Mindfulness practice too is key. So when we're being mindful, and maybe in the metta practice we do come across some challenging, it's not to force ourselves past that challenge, it's to be mindful and recognize, oh, here's aversion, here's difficulty, here's this memory. And when we find ourselves spiraling out of control, when we're attempting to practice metta, then we fall back onto our mindfulness practice, so that we can be with that aversion and practice being mindful of that aversive quality, so that we can see the truth. Nothing to get attached to, nothing to cling to, nothing to get lost in. So when you're practicing, if you find difficulty, there's some options. It's like, okay, if I'm finding difficulty with the neutral person, let me go back to the last target that I did find this loving, well-wishing quality with. Let me reconnect. And then once I've reconnected and established that, then I can venture back into seeing if I can, express that quality to the more difficult person. And it's not just your arch enemy or the difficult person category. You could experience suddenly, wow, here I am, my benefactor, so much good feeling, but yet here I am and something has come up, something has arisen in the mind, and there's this, subtle aversion of feeling small in their presence, like, if that's possible. I don't know. I imagine everyone's got fantastic benefactors, but I'm just trying to give an example. Or most likely, if you're dealing with the close friend category, because sometimes our best friends are our spouses, and sometimes we don't get along, and that condition, past personal history, something might come up of the time where they didn't do the dishes, but so it's being mindful in your metta practice. And this metta quality, it establishes a wise heart. It gives you the insight that you're able to and man, it is so powerful, so powerful to have been in a relationship with somebody where there is some hurt feelings, some difficulty, maybe even some judgment of that person, where you're burdening them with your expectations and all these sort of things. And then suddenly you find some freedom of that in your mind, in your heart, and then you come into contact with them again, and it's palatable. They can fully experience, like, wow, this person isn't coming with judgment. This person is coming with acceptance. They care. They're not self-focused on themselves. They're present with me. I mean, this idea of safe spaces, I kind of explore these sort of things. And to me, safe space means I can be with somebody who's fully accepting me, who I am, and they're not judging me. I don't think of safe spaces where, okay, they're not going to say something that offends me. I mean, I feel like that's my responsibility. I can take care of that. But safe to me feels like, okay, I'm with this person and they're not judging me harshly. They're not, they're not trying to change me, mold me into their image. They're fully accepting me for who I am. To me, that's a quality of non-harming. So that's metta practice. And I figured we would practice that today. But before we move into that, I thought we could kind of briefly talk about the other Brahma Viharas. So compassion practice is really a wonderful, interesting practice. Whereas metta practice, we're wishing for the well-being of the people that we're calling to mind. We can use the same systematic approach with our compassion practice, but what we're really wishing in that is that they be free of suffering. So may you be happy, and then compassion practice is may you be free of suffering. The well wish of, may you be fulfilled, may life go easy for you is metta. Compassion practice, and the Pali word for compassion is kama. The Sanskrit word for that is karma. No, not karma, but sorry, I'm mixing up my terms. But anyway, with compassion practice, it's the wish that they be free of suffering. And it can just be that simple, where you're calling yourself to mind, may I be free of suffering. And it could just be that simple, that it doesn't go into a more in-depth phrase. It could just be, may I be free of suffering, may I be free of suffering. And then calling to mind the benefactor, may you be free of suffering. May you be free of suffering, and so on and so forth. There's ways of practicing that I've, maybe this might be more of a Tibetan style, but it's kind of more of a visualization that I've read about that people, monastics have used. Matthieu Ricard is a Tibetan monk, and his practice is really intense. And studies show that, our expression of compassion comes out of our ability to be with suffering, our own and others. It's the heart and mind's natural response to suffering. So if we go about avoiding suffering, not seeing it, trying our best to shield ourselves from it, we're not giving our compassion that opportunity to grow in response to it. And in a meditation practice, this can be something that we do with a tremendous courage and courageousness of heart. So I'll just describe this because it's a very visual practice. What Matthieu Ricard, how he described his practice, and I'll be kind of embellishing this a little bit. He envisions himself driving, and he's driving along, and he comes along the scene of an accident. He pulls over and he gets out, and he can see that someone has been thrown from the vehicle of this accident. And he comes to see this person, and he can see right away that it is very bad. Their body's mangled. And as he gets closer, he recognizes that it's his mother. And just feeling that anguish, that pain, that like, oh my gosh. And he kneels down by her, and he can see that she's just barely hanging on. And he feels that heartache of her in that pain, of the intimacy of it, really feeling that suffering, feeling that it's not a morbid thing, but it's recognizing that the heart has this capacity to be with that intensity. And then he starts expressing this compassionate, and it's like a visualization of seeing this white light radiating out of him into her. And as he expresses this compassionate, may you be free of suffering, in the visualization, it makes her whole. She becomes whole again, healed, whole and complete and healthy. May you be free of suffering. May you be free of suffering. And it's feeling this quality radiating from you and pouring into the person. And it's a mindfulness practice in that you recognize that this is a mindfulness, this is a practice. And it's not like this torturous pursuit of I'm going to like put myself through a real terrible thing here by visualizing this. It's just a way of connecting to the truth that there is such hardship that takes place in the world, and that another monk, what he described his compassion practice like is that he's meditating, and in his lap is a kitten, and this kitten is broken, sick, again barely hanging on, and he just is with this kitten and really feeling the heartache of that, really feeling that, the pain of it. And then he starts expressing, he moves into his compassion, because compassion is kind of these two qualities of empathy that takes place. Empathy, where we're able to put ourselves in the shoes of another and empathize with them. So empathy informs the mind and the heart, through our ability to relate. Like, I know what's happening in that person's life. That's suffering. I know that suffering. I've suffered. Suffering is relative. And the way I talk about that sometimes is that, the businessman that just lost his job and he thinks it's the end of the world, that's his suffering. That's suffering. And then there might be a kid in high school whose grades, it's extremely important to him, and he's always gotten A's, and now suddenly he's gotten an F, and it's the end of his world. Both profound suffering for those individuals. And when we are willing to be with our suffering, we recognize that in others, and it's like, okay, I see this is suffering. So that's the empathy informing us. And then we can move into compassion. I feel like it's empathy that gets fatigued, because it's, there's a sense of self in that. But when we move into compassion practice, where we actually want to take action to alleviate the suffering of another. In these meditation practices, it's a visualization process. In real life, the expression of compassion is wise action. It's wise because we're recognizing suffering, and the action is to do something to alleviate that suffering. And so in that expression of compassion, we're no longer selfing. The self isn't necessarily there with this kind of, oh, I recognize that. It's more just like we suddenly are focused on alleviating the suffering of that individual. We're no longer considering ourselves. We're just totally focused on doing what we can to be of service to that individual. And to me, I see this play out in disasters that we see, natural disasters, where your house might have been affected by this disaster, but now you're focused on helping your neighbor. You're not thinking about your hardship. You're thinking about their hardship and what you can do for them. Let me take care of that individual, and then I'll figure out my own business, And it's just kind of this natural thing that takes place. That's my thoughts around that. The next Brahma Vihara is mudita, and that's sympathetic joy. And sympathetic joy is just this wonderful capacity that we have where we can take happiness in the happiness of others, where we can see someone, see them prosper, see their good fortune, and not feel like, oh no, look at them look at their success. Where's my success? That's kind of the opposite. The envy quality is the opposite of what I'm describing. This joy is when we can see, the good fortune of others. These are things that can be practiced and cultivated. And when you cultivate this quality of mudita, Facebook becomes a fantastic place. You see everybody having their, showing off their best stuff, and you're just like so happy. It's like, wow, fantastic. May your happiness continue. May your prosperity continue. And it's not so like, it's like, gosh, look at everybody else have fun, and here I am sitting alone again. eating fast food, no one loves me, all of that kind of stuff. It's more like, just wow, wow, that's fantastic. I had somebody recently tell me how much money they made. And I was like, whoa, I didn't even know that was possible. And I was just genuinely excited and happy for them. Like, let's celebrate. And they're like, no, I've kind of made this much money for a long time. It's all right. And I'm like, no, this is fantastic. I didn't know this was possible. That's so cool. And it's just like, so one of my teachers, she gives this kind of example of it's like when you see a little kid having fun and they're playing and you see them smile and you just naturally smile in response. And then the next person who's open to it, maybe they don't see the kid, but they see you smile, and then they smile, and it's like this chain reaction. This is the kind of boundless quality that we can experience joy in that way. It's fantastic. And then there's the quality of equanimity. And equanimity is, it's not indifference, it's connection, but it's non-preferential. Connecting to what is without preference. So the pleasant and the unpleasant, it's all good. There's a way of cultivating this quality of equanimity to where it is all good. So equanimity as a meditation practice, it's kind of working with a particular phrase. And the phrase is, you are the heir to your actions. Your happiness, your unhappiness depends upon your actions and not my wishes. And so you practice this with yourself. I am the heir to my actions. My happiness, my unhappiness depends upon my actions and not my wishes. And then maybe you call these targets to mind, your close friend, your family member. To me, man, this is a liberating practice in itself too, because it helps you unmesh in some of these relationships where we, find ourselves being codependent. Everybody's got some codependency, and then there's, the codependency that really affects us and causes a lot of difficulty and hardship in our relationships, where we really are, dysfunctional. And when that kind of dysfunction is there, that suffering is there, it can be hard to recognize. But when you start working with this phrase to where you're really recognizing that the independence of somebody and that your wishes, it helps you kind of wake up to the misplaced sense of responsibility. It helps you wake up to, the tendency to enable, beginning to let that go. It frees yourself and frees the people that you might be in that kind of challenging relationship with. Good stuff. So I'm just touching upon these. There's meditation practices for the 4 Brahma Viharas. And it's this understanding that these are boundless states, that these are qualities of mind, processes in the mind that can be strengthened, cultivated through practice. And oftentimes, we don't recognize it. We don't recognize what we're practicing. And that's the importance of practicing mindfulness, so that we can wake up and recognize, what is the mind practicing? Is the mind practicing resentment? Is the mind practicing worry and remorse and hurt feelings, running through the story, ruminating and all of these sort of things about the past or our fears about the future? If we're not aware, then we don't recognize that, oh, that's what the mind is practicing. The mind is practicing greed. The mind is practicing aversion. I'm getting better at these things because they're being practiced. When we're mindful, we wake up and we start to see, oh, look at what the mind's doing. That's not serving me. Let me renounce that. Let me practice these wholesome states of mind that do serve me. And as you mature in your practice, these wholesome states, man, they're fantastic. They're wonderful. And then as you mature in your practice, it's like, okay, let me not get attached to these wholesome states. They're just a process in the mind. There is no one behind them. There's no one being, mindful. There's There's no one behind these states. These are just, it's the mind coming together with intention, volition, motivation, all this working together, giving a very convincing illusion of a self that we think is running the show. But we're also trying to recognize that. How am I selfing in this moment? So all sorts of great stuff to explore when you practice. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yeah.
Occasionally, lately, when I have sat to practice one of the Dharma cards, particularly compassion or metta, loving kindness meditation, sometimes it's not so much that irritation arises, it just doesn't come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about that?
So the question was, when I practice, what is it when the feeling doesn't arise? So so many good stuff with that. When the feeling doesn't arise, I think it's helpful just even if the feeling does arise, it's helpful just to kind of have this understanding that this is just a little seed. This is just a little, as one teacher puts it, a little bud. And that the more I take care of this bud, it flowers and blooms and it grows. So if you're sitting there practicing and you're like, man, I don't have compassion, I can't connect to this loving kindness, this friendliness. I mean, that's love. That's a strong word. I'm having a hard time just being friendly. People suck, and then you're sitting with this and trying to connect to that. There's a couple things you can do. One thing is that before you even start your metta practice, let's just talk about metta. Before you even start your metta practice, it's helpful to connect to that feeling. And the best way to do that is just to call to mind a time when you felt completely supported, completely loved, completely accepted. And then connect to that feeling, that what it feels like to have somebody who just is there for you in that way. And if you don't have anybody in your life that helps you recognize that feeling, then just consider a time when you felt so much joy. Swinging on a swing set, or coming home and your pet, your dog, running up and just like, I love you. You're the best person in the world. And it's just like, oh yeah, my dog is totally right about me. My dog is so wise in recognizing how wonderful I am, and it's like, okay, unconditional love from my dog. Connect to that and just how good that feels. Or maybe it's, maybe you are able to connect to somebody who's been of benefit to you, a benefactor or a parent, or, someone close who has just been like, I fully accept you. You can do no wrong in my eyes. I mean, obviously you do wrong, but it's like, I love you anyway. It's just total acceptance, total care. And just how does that feel? And then stay in touch with that. And if you go through the metta, targets, expressing these things, and you lose touch with that felt sense, you just go back to it, call it to mind again and feel it. One time when I was on retreat, there was a meditator who had that same question, and they were asking the teachers. It's like, well, she wasn't necessarily asking the teachers. She was recounting a story because she thought it would be helpful for people to hear this, and it was. She was practicing, and she just like could not connect to that quality no matter what. Thinking about dogs, pets, goldfish, parents, she couldn't connect. It just like, it was such a turnoff to mushy lovey-dovey, this expression. She just couldn't connect to it, but she knew it's what would be helpful to practice. And so in her mind, and this is the great thing about practicing the Dharma, is that you've got the freedom to really explore these practices and to make them your own. And in a way, she kind of did that with her metta practice, and it was profound. She gave herself a heart transplant. In her mind, she visualized giving herself a heart transplant and this new heart that was capable. It was a metta heart transplant. That's what she called it. And she gave herself a heart that was capable. And just that little shift in perspective, that little just subtle reframing, she was able to do it. She was able to do it enough to where she could connect to the feeling, and she kept doing that, connecting to that feeling to where it could begin to grow. And I just, man, see, that's awesome. That's creative, you know? And so much about this practice is like the invitation is to be creative. The invitation is to play. You know, it doesn't have to be this, you know, serious pursuit. That can be helpful at times, but sometimes it can just be play, explore, see what it's like. I'm always encouraging people to play with their practice, you know? Sometimes people really have to deal with really intense experiences, like dealing with fear. You know, my whole life has been ruled by fear. I'm like, cool, man, that's awesome. You're lucky. You get to explore fear because that's the quality of mindfulness. Mindfulness meets whatever's present. So whatever's present is perfect. That's the perfect time to explore that state of mind, being mindful of it, just sitting, being present and aware. And so what does being aware mean? It means knowing what's happening, knowing fear is present in the mind and knowing it, fear. What's it feel like in the body? What's it feel like in the mind? What's it feel like in the heart? What is fear? Not why am I fearful, but what is fear? And so then it's kind of like, okay, I can practice being mindful of fear, but you know, sometimes maybe I'm not prepared for it. You know, fear's ruled my life. Let's say, as an example, I'm not prepared for it. It always, you know, the suffering associated with that state is so profound that it overtakes the mindfulness. And I have to make a skillful retreat into one of the three refuges to take care of myself. But maybe I venture back in, you know, and I kind of explore and all this kind of stuff. And then maybe I hear this idea of play. And so one things that I like to kind of recommend is like find a time where you do feel steady, secure, and confident to explore the state. But dang it, the state isn't there. How do I explore it? Well, maybe just consider like, okay, how can I meet fear where I'm prepared for it instead of it like, you know, coming at me unprepared and I get thrown for a loop? Can I like consider, and it's kind of like that's where you begin to notice like, okay, what's the causes associated with this? And as you're mindful, you start to notice patterns. And it's like, oh, you know, when I go to work and I'm in the setting of a meeting, that's when I know fear's gonna, that because I've been paying attention, I've been mindful, that's when fear's gonna show up. So the next time I get called to a meeting at work, I'm going to be ready for it. You know, the mind can like, okay, here it comes. I've got one student of mine who has experienced, he's been involved with conflicts and, you know, military and all that kind of stuff. And just through some past conditioning of his service, he had an anxiety about stepping out of a warm shower into the cold air and just triggering fear for him and feeling like he couldn't work with that. You know, it's just constantly being ruled by it. And it was just a very simple encouragement that, okay, prepare yourself for it. When you're still in the shower, practice being mindful, connect to your breathing, connect to the body, find that sense of embodiment, and be prepared for, okay, the likelihood for this to arise. See if you can be there for it. See if you can see it arise in the mind. See it changing. Not in order for it to go away, but in order to see it changing from moment to moment. Nothing is fixed and permanent. Be there for it. Meet it. You're affording yourself the opportunity to begin to understand it when you do that. For other people, you know, it's like I say, well, you know, go meditate in your dark basement, you know, because all the movies in the world have conditioned us to think that being in the dark basement by yourself, that's where scary stuff happens. You know, and even in a more realistic sense, you're sitting in your basement in the dark, you know, well, what if a spider bites me? And then the mind will just go crazy with this anxiety and fear of what if a spider bites me as I'm sitting in the basement? And so you can just sit and be like, oh, here comes the fear, you know? Or maybe it's just the next time you go camping and you're in your tent, you know, and it's like Sasquatch is outside the tent. And, you know, and can I just sit there and be mindful of this fear that has arisen in the mind and just watch it, come to understand it, find freedom from it? Not to sit there and practice suffering, but to sit there and practice how to be free of suffering, how to be in relationship to fear, recognizing that it's unpleasant, but not suffering in that relationship. That's the practice. Okay, we're going to take 10 minutes and I'm going to just kind of do a little bit of guiding through metta practice for us. And we'll just use ourselves as the target that we work with during this 10 minutes. And to begin, we can just settle into being here, present and aware. Nothing to do, nothing to make happen, just being present. And what is it that is being known? Sensation in the body, thoughts arising and passing away, maybe some emotion, the perception of my voice, sounds in the environment. Just being aware of it, just being mindful of what is. And as the mind begins to settle and the body begins to relax, we can move into this doing of our practice, where we maybe begin by calling to mind a time when we felt very supported, accepted, cared for, connecting to that feeling that arises when we recall those memories. Maybe just even inviting the corners of the mouth to smile slightly. It's just this simple good wish, friendly feeling. And then calling ourselves to mind. It might be helpful to maybe even visualize seeing yourself in a mirror. Those times where you maybe make funny faces at yourself. You can see yourself smiling. And expressing this sincere wish for yourself. And that maybe that there's not two of you, there's not just a reflection of yourself, but it is expressing this quality to yourself and feeling yourself in the present moment, sitting, resting, and connecting to that felt sense, that quality of feeling nurtured by this acceptance, this loving kindness quality of goodwill. And just repeating silently to yourself the phrases, may I be safe and protected. May I be happy and free. May I be healthy and peaceful. May I live my life with ease. And just taking a moment to reflect upon the goodness in wishing happiness for yourself. Very natural wish. That we each deserve happiness. We each deserve to be safe, happy, healthy. And it is a very natural wish to express for ourselves. May I be safe and protected. May I be happy and free. May I be healthy and peaceful. May I live my life with ease. And feeling this quality wherever you recognize it to be in the body, this well wishing, and allowing it to just radiate. Feeling it radiate throughout the body. And then beginning to radiate just from the surface of the body in all directions. May we be safe. May we be happy. May we be healthy. May we live our lives with ease. May the benefit of this practice be a cause and a condition for our own awakening and the awakening of all beings. Thank you all so much for being here tonight.